So we've got a major new development in a critical election fight, and this case is now rapidly spiraling into one of the biggest election law battles that is currently happening in our country. This is all happening after the Supreme Court issued a major remand order and decision in the Alabama congressional map case. And because of this and this litigation, it has now exploded back into emergency proceedings that are now going to be critical this week and will be developing really fast. So let's talk about what is currently happening with this issue. Now, before we jump into this video, if you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply by subscribing. You can also hit the like button that just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. Now, before we jump into this video, I want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always trying to give you as much as possible as a member. They're always expanding upon their benefits. They've added a ton of new benefits. If you're interested and you want to check those out, you can do so using the links down below. And also right now, if you're interested and you want to sign up, you can use my code ARMEDSCHOLAR. In doing so, for a limited time, we'll give you $50 off of your individual sign-up fee or $25 off of the family fee. So again, if you want, in my opinion, the best self-defense protection, check out AOR using the links down below. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be talking about a critical election / redistricting case that was recently ordered by the Supreme Court to be remanded back down to the lower court for reconsideration in light of a prior ruling that was issued by the Supreme Court. Now, first, we need to understand what the Supreme Court actually did because there's a little bit of confusion online about what they actually said. The Supreme Court did not outright reverse the Alabama District Court ruling. Instead, the Supreme Court vacated and remanded the case back down to the lower court for further reconsideration in light of the Supreme Court's prior and brand new ruling in the case Louisiana versus Calais. Now, that distinction matters a lot because this was not the Supreme Court saying that Alabama automatically wins this case. Instead, the Supreme Court essentially told the lower court, go back and reconsider portions of your prior ruling under the new framework announced in Calais. And specifically, the Supreme Court appears focused on the Voting Rights Act Section 2 analysis that needs to be redone by the lower court. Now, if you remember, the lower federal court had previously ruled that Alabama's 2023 congressional map still unlawfully diluted Black voting strength and violated the federal laws. The lower court then imposed a remedial congressional map that Alabama then had to use. That court-ordered map created a second effective, Black opportunity district, which significantly increased Democratic competitiveness in Alabama, so essentially potentially gave them 2 seats in the House. So politically, this case has massive implications. But now, after the Supreme Court remanded the case back down, Alabama immediately asked to restore its original 2023 legislative enacted map. And that is where this entire situation has now exploded into emergency litigation. And really at stake here is how many, Democrat and Republican, members of the House there potentially will be going forward based on how the map is actually implemented and how this voting currently happens. Now, here's where things currently are becoming wild procedurally. The plaintiffs immediately after that Supreme Court ruling rushed back into the federal lower courts and filed emergency motions asking for the district court to keep the current remedial map in place. And if that, happens, they would potentially get 2 seats for Democrats in the House. The plaintiffs argued that the remedial map is now the actual status quo, not Alabama's old 2023 map. Their argument in support of keeping the remedial map is that Alabama has already been using that map, that the candidates already are campaigning under that current map, that election officials already prepared for the elections under it, and that absentee ballots already went out based on that map, and the voters have already started casting ballots under that current structure. And because of that, they argued that suddenly changing congressional maps now would create complete election chaos. Now, in response to that emergency motion, Alabama has officially responded, and the state is arguing that the Supreme Court's new decision in Louisiana versus Calais completely changed the legal framework governing these types of claims. According to Alabama, the lower court cannot simply reuse its old rulings because the Supreme Court significantly updated the legal standards that now apply. The state argues that the plaintiffs' maps fail under the new framework because they rely too heavily on race, failed to satisfy all of Alabama's legitimate districting goals, and improperly split, certain communities and certain interests in a way that it does not comply with what the Supreme Court said. Alabama is also arguing that voting patterns must now be separated between race and politics, claiming much of the voter behavior here is partisan rather than racial. And procedurally, Alabama says that the Supreme Court already restored the 2023 map when it vacated the injunctions and immediately issued its judgment. So Alabama argues that the federal courts should not now reimpose another emergency injunction while the elections are already underway. And now, because of all this chaos and urgency with the election currently pending, the district court is moving incredibly fast to resolve this issue. The court here has already set immediate hearings on these emergency motions, and that is going to take place May 22nd of this week. That means over the next several days, the lower court is going to be weighing emergency injunction requests, arguments about election administration, constitutional claims, and look at whether Alabama can go back to that 2023, election map, or if it needs to stay under the remedial map that was currently in place and that is potentially going to be used. And because of this is becoming one of the biggest active election law fights in the country. And one final thing that I need to mention, and for you guys to understand why this is important, because this is not just about Alabama. This case now sits directly at the intersection of Voting Rights Act litigation, election administration, emergency Supreme Court intervention, and the growing fight over, how far federal courts should actually go in these type of redistricting disputes. At the same time, the Supreme Court itself appears to be recalibrating how these Voting Rights Act cases are analyzed after Calais. And one final thing that's important to understand here is why this case likely matters also far beyond just the election law issues themselves. This type of issue impacts the makeup and control of the House of Representatives, and that ultimately affects, everything from federal litigation, committee leadership, oversight of agencies like the ATF and the DOJ, the judicial confirmations, so judges who are going to be in federal courts, and the broader constitutional litigation involving other issues, including a lot of what we talk about here on the channel, which is Second Amendment litigation. So while this case is fundamentally about elections and constitutional procedure, the downstream effects absolutely impact firearms policy and constitutional rights and issues going forward. So that's what's currently happening in response to that Supreme Court order. The order remanding the case back down to the district court, dealing with Alabama's redistricting battle. The Supreme Court remanded the case back down for reconsideration, but now that remand has triggered a massive emergency fight. And now immediate hearings are set as the lower court races to determine what happens next with the looming election. So this case is moving extremely fast, of course, because of the election deadlines and also all these emergency requests that are currently happening. So as we get more information, as this develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.